Great. Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everyone. So we still have some folks jumping on and joining us, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. I think that was Dawn's song, and I don't see Dawn yet. I don't think of, unless I'm missing her. So we will make sure that we circle back and hear from Dawn about why she chose that song when she is able to hop on. But we are excited to all be together and all have a chance to learn with each other and from each other again tonight. We did, Nicole and I wanted to acknowledge off the top tonight that this has been quite a rough week. So between losing Justice Ginsburg last week on Friday night, on Rosh Hashanah no less, and then kind of barely catching our breath from that, and then hearing that there would be no justice for Breonna Taylor, definitely has lots of us feeling lots of ways. And so we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that and are grateful that you all are here, and that we're grateful for this community and the work we're all doing, but also know that come with however much energy, however much you can give, but we are very understanding that for some of you that might not be however much you would like to on a regular day or week. And so we did want to make sure that we acknowledge that off the top. But we are glad that we are all here and that we have each other, and that we all are trying to figure out how do we do the work of building a more just world. So thank you all for being here tonight. And just remember to have your participant guide up. And so if you don't have that up, Kendall will chat in the link. So if you all remember Kendall, Kendall, you want to wave up there? Yay, Kendall's our intern from Miami this fall, and she's helping with some of the tech stuff. So she'll chat in the link to the participant guide. It just has a bunch of the links for tonight, so we can have that open. So we will start the same way we always do. So Nicole, it looks like I can't share while I think the music stuff is still on. So we'll start the same way we always do with reminding ourselves why we are here. And so let's pull up our vision. And if somebody wouldn't mind taking themselves off mute and reading our vision statement.
When education advocates and aspiring school board members are empowered with the knowledge and network they need to drive systemic change, every child will have the opportunity to succeed in school and beyond, and the entire community will be positively impacted.
Thanks, Emma. All right, and then what are we doing with this session? Why do we come together? So you can either read it from the screen or page 37 in your journal, whichever is easier for you. And there are a lot of them here again this time, so we'll have someone read the first column and someone else read the second. So anyone who wants to read us that first column of objectives.
Classmates will begin to understand the kinds of topics the board discusses, see how the board addresses issues and what topics they prioritize for discussion, apply what they learned about how the board operates to the format of board meetings, see if the board addresses topics that are of particular motivation to school board school participants, watch for examples of the qualities of effective or ineffective boards that were previously discussed.
Great, thanks, John. And someone else want to finish us off with the second column?
Believe that qualities such as listening before stating an opinion, asking questions, respecting diverse opinions, and being willing to change your position when you get new information lead to effective boards that can move work forward efficiently. Believe that student achievement depends on strong leadership by the board and superintendent, understand the basic principles of asset mapping, and be able to apply them to your group project, and believe it is important to learn from people in our community affected by and or already working on the education issues you are passionate about.
Great, thanks, Jacqueline. All right, so that is a lot for us to cover, but how we're going to cover that, as you all know, first part of our night is with Board President Carolyn Jones. We'll be debriefing the meeting with her, learning from her, getting the inside scoop on how the board operates. And then the second half of our night is with Liz and Emma from Community Building Institute at Xavier University, where we'll learn from them about asset mapping. So after we go from kind of big picture, why are we here, to why are we here tonight, we always go to, well, why am I here? So we're going to do this in a couple different ways for our vision for impact statement tonight. So first, we want you to take just like 30 seconds and to yourself kind of read yours over again. You might have written it on page 38 for pre-work or somewhere in your journal. So you'll take a second to reread that. And then we always talk about how you're not doing this alone, right? That's the whole point of being together. And so we asked you to record flip grids of your vision for impact statement or whatever you're wrestling with to try to figure out your vision for impact statement. And so if you had a chance to watch other people's, we're going to ask you to just take a couple minutes and do a private chat to them about what you heard. So if somebody said something in their vision statement that's really compelling, chat it into them. If somebody's trying to contemplate something and you want to be a thought partner, chat that in. Whatever you want to chat about what you heard on some of those flip grids. If you didn't have a chance to watch the flip grids, Kendall just chatted in the link and you can watch a couple of them during this time. So let's take 3 minutes and first just to yourself, read your own, and then either do some private chats or watch a couple flip grids. Go ahead for 3 minutes. All right. Great. Well, and I appreciated those. It was really fun to watch all of your flip grids and kind of get in your brains and see what you're thinking about. And I really appreciated some folks were kind of talking us through their thought processes. Other people were really specific in where they were going. It was really cool. So if you haven't had time to watch your classmates yet, those, you can go to that flip grid anytime and watch them. It's really interesting to hear all the different things people are excited and passionate about and working towards. So thanks for doing all of those. And before we kind of dive into the work, we always love being in community together and learning about each other. So we are going to do a quick warm up. Nicole is going to put us in groups of 3. Carolyn, you, me, and Nicole are going to jump in these rooms too. So be ready. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have 6 minutes together. So you got about 2 minutes each. And you are going to fill in this blank. You ready? The best meal I ever ate was, got it? Best meal I ever ate. Go for it. All right, I think we're all back. I was just thinking, like, doubting the wisdom of that choice as our question, since this session is like right in the middle of dinner time. I was like, why did I just ask us about that? Anyway, hopefully we all heard about some good meals. I got a good tip on a good vegetarian meal, so hopefully that was fun. And then I was telling Jill while we were in there, my husband is traveling for work for the first time in like 6 months, and he's in DC. And he just sent me a picture from the DC airport of the back of Bernie Sanders' head. He's like, I just said hi to Bernie Sanders. Isn't that cool? That was pretty fun. Yeah, he's like, I just saw him. It was like, hey, Bernie, and he turned and waved. So pretty excited. Anyway, so hopefully that was fun. We got to hear a little bit more about each other. Thank you, Carolyn, for joining us and for jumping right in. We are excited, as you all know, because you got to meet Carolyn before during the superintendent speech debrief. She is a wealth of knowledge and always very honest and very transparent. So we know we're going to learn a ton from her tonight. If you want to pin Carolyn so you don't lose her, you can go to speaker view, or you can just hover over her and those 3 dots come up and you can choose pin. So don't forget you can do that. There were a ton of questions on the mural. So Carolyn, we use this online platform called Mural, and it's like a place you can just kind of put like Post-it notes. And after Monday night's meeting, it exploded with questions. And so if you want to remind yourself of what some of your questions were, Kendall just chatted in the link to that mural. But I went through them and noticed they kind of fell into 3 main buckets. One bucket was really around COVID-19, of course, and the return to school, and lots of questions about that. There was another big bucket around the CPS anti-racism policy and practices around anti-racism in CPS. And then the third bucket was really around, like, how does the board work? How do board members make decisions? Who's doing what? Those kinds of things. So I'm going to kick us off by asking the first question, but then I'm going to leave it up to you all to really ask the rest. I may jump in somewhere along the way and ask some of your questions just to make sure that we get to something from each of those buckets. But really, most of this time is going to be for you all to lead it. And we're always transparent with you all about why we're doing things. And we'll tell you, Nicole and I always read all of your evaluations and your surveys. And we got some feedback saying it was great after the town hall that I went through bucketed questions and then asked the questions so that you knew something was going to be asked that was something like what you were wondering about. And then other people said they really liked the last session with Eileen, Rick, and Mary, where I didn't ask anything and you all asked all of the questions. And so we're kind of trying to do both since we got feedback on both. So that's why I'm going to kind of kick us off, may jump in along the way, but we'll mostly leave it up to you all. So this is how it'll work. If you want to ask a question, use the raise your hand feature, and Nicole will chat in when you're up. Okay, so just kind of check out the chat and she'll type in when it's your turn. When it is your turn, please take yourself off mute and like ask Carolyn your question. We want her to actually hear from you, not just see you write something in. And so as always, you know, of course, just be mindful of your time on the floor. If you've asked something, wait until other folks get a chance to ask. That is it. So I am going to jump in and ask Carolyn the first question. So we had, like I said, a bunch of questions around kind of how you make decisions, Carolyn. And so this is kind of a two-part question. So some folks were saying, do you get the superintendent's presentations beforehand? Because, oh my goodness, that seems like a lot of information for you to absorb, think about, figure out what questions you want to ask, come to a decision on. And so there was that kind of question, like, how do you do all of that in the moment? And then a second set of questions that was around input from the public. So like when you hear from 50 or 100 people in hearing of the public, does that ever change your mind? How do you kind of absorb all of that information? So really this two-parter, like, do you guys get the presentations from the superintendent beforehand? And then how do you, Carolyn Jones, take all of this information coming from admin, hearing of the public, and think through what questions you have and what opinion you're going to have or decision you'll make?
Yes. Okay, thank you. So let me start with the response about the presentations. And, you know, under normal circumstances, and for the most part, we do get the superintendent's presentations ahead of time. And that's just built into our process. And we have an opportunity to review the presentations and prepare for, you know, prepare questions that we might want to direct to her. I have to be honest and say that throughout this whole process of first shutting down schools in March, then reopening and all of that, that has been challenging sometimes because the deadline to get things in, to process for board meetings creeps up on, and sometimes the superintendent needs all of that time to sort of prepare. So on some occasions, it has been that we see the presentations, we either get them that day, and some of us like myself, because I'm trying to prepare to facilitate the meeting, if she sends an email, I may not have a chance to see it beforehand, and I always go back and review it. So sometimes, you know, there have been times, in all honesty, that we haven't reviewed the presentation before she actually presents it. But that's in the you know, we're in an unusual time, and that's the only reason why. So, yeah. So I hope that answers the question around that. So for the most part, we have, but more recently, especially because everything has been so fast-paced and chaotic, there have been times when we have not looked at it beforehand. And then how do we, shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like how do you take in all this information?
How do we process all the hearing of the public? Well, let me just say, the COVID-19 planning and reopening schools has certainly changed the culture of the school district and how we operate. And I will say that we've had more public response and reaction to district plans than we've ever had in the history of the school district, okay? So that's a positive thing. Now, I will say, though, that, well, first of all, information from the public comes to us in different forms. One, there is the formal platform for hearing of the public, and You know, I get comments all the time about people feeling like that's pretty limiting because people can't really say what they want to say in 2 to 3 minutes. We're required by statute to have a hearing of the public, and it is our standard of practice to allow 3 minutes for people to speak. And that's usually enough time in normal circumstances, but in unnormal circumstances, we have had to minimize it to 2 minutes so that we can get everybody in. So that's a little more stringent of a process. Secondly, we get tons of emails. Right now, I have, I believe it was 537 emails that I haven't read over a period of just a few days, okay? So board members are frequently reviewing emails. The superintendent frequently reviews emails. We try to respond to all of them. But again, I'm going to keep repeating this. These are not normal times. There are some emails that don't require, nor will I even respond to them for lots of reasons. But if there is an email that comes in that is expressing concerns or wanting to voice their opinion and offer recommendations and assistance, I absolutely try to respond to all of them. So that's another format. On rare occasions, we get letters, but that's not too often. People are more into the digital formats right now. So what happens to all the information that we get in terms of recommendations and requests? In hearing of the public, the superintendent has a folder. She has a legal pad. She documents every single comment, expression of what someone wants, complaints, inquiries, data sources, all of that. She comes out of that meeting with pages of stuff. Board members don't necessarily, some of our board members take notes. Just for me, what I tend to do is document around themes. So I'm listening because I want to try to hear people. I want to make sure that I'm listening. So I just try to document by theme. You know, people are asking, for example, parent choice is a popular theme now. So I just document on that. And then we have a staff. We have 2 ladies who work, their board staff, we have access to, who also provide some guidance and documentation around some of the information that comes to us. So those are pretty much the formats that we do. And how do we process it? We process it sort of in our normal ways of doing business. We have meetings where we discuss the information that we're hearing. I forgot to mention one, social media. Social media is a huge communication venue. I have not been, me personally, I have not been a fan of social media lately. I do try to touch base with social media to read the kind of feel and sense and gauge what's going on out there. But, and some board members love social media and they use it regularly. It kind of depends on where you are, but for me, I find it very disturbing because in my opinion, just my opinion, most of it is negative and most of it is people reacting out of lack of knowledge. So it really depends on your personal preference. But that is also one. So when we come together as a board, we're processing all this stuff. You know, but basically there are some things that come out very clearly that we try to prioritize as we're moving forward with reopening school. And right now, the theme of all the information that we're getting is primarily about what's going to happen to Walnut Hills High School. That's primarily the theme. Then another theme is people expressing opinions about either wanting to stay in virtual or wanting to go back full time or whatever. And to be honest with you, no one preference is rising above the next. So it's pretty spread out all over the place. So does that answer your questions about that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, Kate, you're up.
Hi, I'm Kate McCracken. My son's an 8th grader at Clark Montessori, and I live in Pleasant Ridge. I'm newish to Cincinnati. I've been here just for 2 years. So glad that you're giving us your time tonight. You've been pulling some late hours lately. So thank you for doing it. I'm sure that the current circumstances will influence this somehow, but I also think this might be a all the time thing. I noticed in particular in the first part of, not the most recent meeting, not the special meeting, but the one on whenever that was, the 14th, that it was hard to follow the beginning parts of the agenda and all things that the board had worked on before and talked about before as a member of the public. And it got me thinking, if part of the school board school experience is about discerning the impact I want to make and figuring out what seat I want to make it from, the thing I'm really curious about is, are there opportunities to transform the board and the way the board operates from within the board, or does that happen somewhere else?
Well, I have my question to you is, I would want to know, I would want to hear from you what you're thinking about in terms of transforming. But let me repeat what I heard, because
Sure.
I can respond to that. What I heard you say is at the beginning of the board meeting is kind of hard to follow. So my first question is that the part of the meeting where we're doing sort of what we call board business, such as giving meeting? Okay. All right. So to respond to that, the way the agenda is organized, and it's my responsibility to make sure the agenda is pulled together. By statute, we are required to have certain items that we do public business about. And that's in the spirit of transparency and what have you. So in terms of providing a report on our committee minutes and other types of reports, we're required to do that because we cannot move or act on any action of the committee until we review it and approve it as a full board. So the first half of the agenda, we generally take care of what is deemed board business in terms of acting on committee minutes and things like that. The second part of the meeting, which is where our public is more interested in, is the presentations and our board matters pieces. The board has had numerous conversations about which should come first. Okay, should we do that part of it at first when the public is there, and then take care of board business? And I have to say that back several months ago, pre-COVID, we were actually having some conversations about reorganizing the agenda. So it's still on the table for discussion, but right now, I mean, that just is not high priority for us to change it. Throughout the COVID planning and school reopen planning pieces, we have made some adjustments where we've taken the area for presentations, especially when it's the superintendent giving an update, a safety update about the reopening plan, and we've moved it up on the agenda, and we've moved up hearing of the public to follow her presentation directly rather than waiting 2 or 3 or 4 agenda items down, so that it flows, so that people can get their needs met in terms of responding and it's fresh in their head. So we've made some minor adjustments. And then I will close this by saying the board does 3 or 4 board development and planning sessions throughout the year where we take a day, probably 6 hours on a Saturday. And we do quite a few, planned board development and planning activities. I promise you, Kate, this is going to be on the agenda because it has been raised by a number of people and board members who also have concerns about the order of the agenda.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
You did. Am I allowed to take a little bit more time, Elisa? Shake your head if not. Yes, I see you nodding. Okay, so like the more specific thing I think is about the board business, because it is really easy to follow the board matters. Everyone is getting the presentation at the same time. And so I think if I'm thinking about how to transform the board so that it is easier for community members to engage and follow, I would be asking you, do you have the power from your seat, or maybe it sounds like in these board development and planning days, to transform the way communication is shared? We know everything is on the website, but who can find on that website, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and actually, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, communication has been a huge issue over the past several months, and we acknowledge that. Let's just be straightforward about that. We acknowledge that communications is an issue. The superintendent knows it, and you know, one of the things the superintendent said a while ago is that we're gonna, as a district, we're gonna have to be flexible and agile. But flexible and agile does not excuse lack of transparency and poor communication. And we recognize that. And we're on top of that in the sense that we recognize it. The problem, I think, comes in how do we then begin to impact that? So that part of that is we do try to make adjustments on a meeting by meeting basis, depending on the need, but we also need to sit down as a board unit. So I don't have the authority on my own to change it. I can recommend change, which I've done throughout this. When we're gathering, when we're trying to formulate our agenda, I oftentimes ask people for their thoughts about where things go on the agenda and whatever. So we've done that to some extent, but to sort of overhaul it, we would have to have sort of a board session on how we would do that, so that would impact how well we communicate with the public.
super helpful. Thanks for illuminating.
All right, Lauren, do you want to jump in?
Carolyn. Yeah, I just had a kind of a follow-up question kind of tied to Kate's. So just to make sure I understood correctly, the presentations are on the website in advance of the meeting typically. So if it's something that you were able to see in advance, it's something the public would have also been able to see?
Well, I'm not going to say that the presentations have been on prior to the board meeting.
Okay.
Not over the past several months. It's been, and I don't want to say that too lightly, because I think it is important for people to have it. And like I said, under normal circumstances, we wouldn't. But things are moving so fast at the district, to be honest, and really I am defending the superintendent here. Sometimes decisions and plans get finalized at the very last minute, like the day of the board meeting. And we can't get it on the website quick enough. So in those situations, we just ask for people's patience, but we generally will put it up that evening or the day after so that people can have it. And I want you all to know that I am making a note of some of the ideas and suggestions that you have. I think it's not to make excuses, but the communication altogether has just not been as solid as we want it to be.
And then just a follow-up question, can you think of a time when you felt like the public kind of had been informed in advance of the information? And did you see a difference in the way that the public responded in the meeting? For example, if they had been able to see information like days in advance, and then did you see a difference in the way they communicated or participated in the follow-up board meeting?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question. Have I seen a difference? I would say, I think the public being informed prior to the meeting is certainly helpful. Do I think it would have had a greater impact over these past several months? No. And I think because dealing with the COVID-19 reopen plans, emotions take over. And so what has happened, what's happening is people might get the information. It doesn't matter. They'll get the information and they either react to it upon looking at it, or they react to it after they read it or whatever. So I don't know that it would help that, because basically what we're dealing with here is a combination of people asking legitimate questions that they want answers to, but there's also a lot of emotion around it. So it's kind of hard to separate that.
Thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
It does,
Lauren?
yes.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, Carolyn. I think just for like some perspective too, I know in normal times, so like when I was on the board, we used to be like super excited if we found out that like the number of people viewing was in the double digits,
Yeah.
right? Like if we had made it to 10 people viewing it, you were like, woohoo! And Erica Copeland-Dansby, who was on the board with me, her mom used to watch every single meeting. So she'd always be like, take out my mom. If we only made it till 10, we really only had 9. And so like, that is what we usually had. And so the fact that they're having, 1,000+ people is pretty remarkable. So I'm going to ask one, and then we'll go back, because there was a lot of questions about the anti-racism policy. And so I think some of them fell into this bucket around how is the district getting really robust community input on the policy? They mentioned a task force, and I know some of us in this group are on that task force, but the people weren't sure, like, how did that task force get put together? And aside from that task force, how are you all getting input from the community on the anti-racism policy?
Okay. And I'm going to answer the best way that I know how. And I think, first of all, I think it's a great thing that we are developing an anti-racism policy that parallels and overlaps and links, or whatever you want to describe it, with our equity policy. The development of the policy itself lies in the policy committee. So Mike Morosky chairs that committee. And when Mike reports to the board, I can remember when it was the idea of developing an anti-racism policy came up, we had full discussion about it at the board, with the full board. And we agreed with Mike's recommendation to have a task force around that. Now, what I know for a fact that one of the things that happened in terms of Mike mobilizing community is, I know he went on a couple of radio shows, and I know he was marketing in, well, Mike's a big social media person, so he was on his social media. He also had it placed on our website that we were seeking input from the public. And even in his meetings, he did something that we typically don't do in our committee meetings, but he had a formal hearing of the public. So people, and he would market that when he put the information out, the schedule for the meeting, he would market that. So we got a lot of input that way. And as a result of that, I think there has been a committee formed that works specifically with the policy committee. And I think there are right now about 28 to 30 people on that committee. So that's how he got there. Now, the superintendent also has sort of an administrative process going on whereby she herself has a community task force. And these are sort of identified people that represent a level of board support and interaction, people that we have dealt with who are our partners in the community. And she is pulling them together as well. And one of the things that we have discussed at the board level is making sure that these are not two distinct efforts, that it's all the same. We're working toward the same goals. The policy is coming to the middle. And although the superintendent is working on this from an administrative sort of day-to-day organization of that, what happens in the day-to-day piece and working with the youth advisory group and what have you, the board is still trying to drive a policy that impacts the entire district.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Tarina, you're up.
Thank you. Hi, Carolyn. How are you tonight, everyone?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. So I have two questions, and it's kind of like, more personal. So if you don't want to answer it, trust me, I totally understand. But I just would like to know, like, how much of your personal experience and views do you put into the decisions and input that you give out there? And that's my first question. And then my second question is, during the meeting, you experienced a lot, from the community output, from the board. How do you finally say this is time to cut it off, and how do you ingest all that overload information that you go through? So I would like to know that.
Those are great questions. But personally, I mean, how do I even start with this? First of all, I never realized how personal this particular effort was. So when you ask me how do I rein in my own personal experiences on this, well, let me start by saying that I'm a product of Cincinnati Public Schools, so I care about the district. I have grandchildren, great-grandchildren, young cousins, a daughter who's a teacher, other relatives who work in the district. So COVID-19 is very personal to me. And one of the things, to be in full transparency, being real honest with you, is I have been accused of being not Black enough. I have been being accused of not caring enough. I have been accused of being a politician, and I don't know, Elisa and I have talked about this. I have never considered myself a politician. I'm an elected official, but I never considered myself a politician. But in my professional career, I was also a 40-year mental health professional who worked with kids. So my personal experiences all lead toward something, a strength that I feel like that I have, that I can help impact the quality of education for all kids. And to be honest with you, Tarita, I still don't consider myself a politician. I consider myself an advocate for kids. Right. But in my official role, it probably doesn't appear that way to many people. So from a personal context, that's how I take all this in and whatever. You asked about cut it off, and help me understand what that question again was.
So I've been on a couple board meetings. So Roselawn Community Council meeting, we have a strict time. We're going to start at 7 and end at 8, no matter if the people still have questions and things like that, which honestly, guys, don't judge me. I'd be like, yes, because I still got to go home and I got to go to the next thing. And I'm not saying their voices and their concerns don't matter, but at the same time, in the interest of time and respectful of everybody's time, I feel like it should be a cutoff. And this is just some of the back work too that I would like want to get to know, like how do you guys discriminate that? Because you can go on, and like you were saying that, but I also want to put this in there too, because I know people have other questions, but your poise was just beautiful. Like you said, you have that background, but at the same time, you are a parent and you are an advocate for it. And I just really appreciate that. I want to make sure I let you know that too.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. My job as the president of the board is to facilitate a discussion, okay? My board colleagues joke with me all the time because they call me a tyrant. They said, or a dictator. They said, we got to take care of this board. But if you know all of these people, Lisa, you know what I'm talking about. We have talkers on this group. They'll talk forever. And I always have to remind them of the time. I always have to do that. But in all fairness, I think the public wants to hear what people have to say. So I try to, when I don't, we have a start time, but I hardly ever attach an ending time.
Okay.
But I do try to control and manage what happens in the meeting, and I do try to keep the meeting moving, and something that I've never done before that I've been doing more of lately is not allowing conversations to recycle. So if every board, I try to make sure every board member has an opportunity to speak. And then you start seeing a second hand of the same speakers. And I'll say to them, I'm trying to get everybody's voice heard. Then we're going to cut it off here. And it's really a management thing. It really is. And it's tough because people have things to say, but I value everybody's time. And as you all remember on that meeting on the 14th, that was a crazy meeting. And we started to get just crazy. I mean, I know that. It was crazy. Everybody was stressed and everybody was tired. But those things happen. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And I just want to say, since you mentioned you're on Roseline Community Council, but many years ago, I was responsible for working with the Roseline Community Council and organized a girls fast pitch softball league.
Oh, wow.
That started with one team based out of Roseline Condon High School and developed into 4 good teams that we have competing in competition. So I was a softball coach. That's part of my experience as well.
Awesome.
I just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's great. And there is, in the bylaws, there's like a place where like, if there's a group coming to talk about the same issue, they can only talk for up to a half an hour on that issue, right? Or like, I think it's 15 minutes or 5 people at 3 minutes. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah,
5 people,
I'm glad you raised that because our board bylaws say that if 5 people want to talk on the same issue, they get, they can't talk any more than 30 minutes or whatever. But we waived that rule through this reopening planning stuff. If because if we waive the rule, we wouldn't have nowhere near this many speakers, and I think we would catch a lot of backlash from the community. So we waived that requirement so that we could hear everybody. Now, we did limit their time, and I was criticized on Facebook, on social media. I mean, they were raking me over the coals for cutting people off, but I'm like, I give you a chance. I say your 2 minutes are up, but I'll let you finish your thought. But if you keep going, I'm gonna go, I don't know how else to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's with 50 to 100 people talking, you have to, eventually have them stop, yes. But did want to just point out that in other more normal times, there is a time limit if people are all came to talk about the same thing.
Yes.
Okay, so Randy, you are up with your question.
Yeah, so I feel we're going through something historic globally. And what I'm really fascinated by is how people approach this decision about reopening schools. It's happening all over the world. And so, given what we've already talked about, like all the various types of input that you're getting and all the things that you're balancing, the health of the community, the health of the schools, the educational progress, and on, I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what got you individually and what do you think got the board? What pieces of information were most influential to the board and leading you to decide that now was the time to reopen schools? And I'm particularly interested in this because similar to Tarina's question, it seemed like, if I'm remembering correctly, it was almost, if not 10 o'clock before the board really got to discuss their individual feelings about this. And so everybody was tired. It had been a long day. I was tired and I was, in my house. So I can imagine you all were tired, but I just wondered if you could just talk about, as you're approaching this decision, and there really is no precedent about how to make it and what the right pieces of information were. What do you think were the key things that influenced the board to decide we're at a point now where it's time to open?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, I think we agreed that we could not make any decisions to move forward without data, without relevant health data, without the assistance of the health professionals, and working in partnership with them. So what we wanted was, number one, the information, the facts that informed us of the what ifs. What if schools open and this happens? So more around how to build on the safety protocol piece. But what drives even your decision is, what do the trends look like? So we have 4 community health trends that we continuously monitor. We get reports from the superintendent every single day of our community health trends. So that was a huge factor in that helped to drive the decision. Secondly, we started planning for school reopening and the future of the district when we closed in March, okay? So when you think about a district of our size sort of closing down, and we had to do it suddenly, we first had to, once we closed down, we had to clean up what was already there. So for example, when the superintendent closed down on March 13th, 3 days, it was a Friday before the 16th, which was the date that the governor closed school down. People had to leave all their personal belongings, their laptops, and all of that. So we had to go back and delegate days that people can go in, clean out the school buildings, you know, so we did that in order to begin deep cleaning all the schools. So we had to go in, deep clean all the schools. Now, in the meantime, we're connecting with health partners, and I have to give kudos to the local health department and especially Children's Hospital, who has been working by our side day in and day out. A number of doctors and experts in this field. Of course, the guidance from the governor and the guidance of CDC were all very helpful to us. And our safety protocols right now are based and grounded in the CDC guidelines. We've implemented every single guideline that the CDC put forth out there. Another huge factor in this, which people don't talk about all the time, and that is the budget, financial implications. A lot of, you know, we hear a lot from the public about what they want. People come out and say, this is what I want. This is what I want for my family. And that's fine. I respect that. But every decision, every option that we made, every decision that we made has a financial implication. And so as a board, it's our job to make sure that number one, whatever we do, whatever option we choose, we need to be aware of what the financial implication is. And I'm just going to put this out there. Every option that was put on the table for discussion has some level of financial loss, every single one. So what we try to do is to try to get a balance and understanding where is the least amount of loss, minimal loss. And when I'm talking about loss, I'm talking about job loss, services, losing services. Our enrollment has decreased. We're losing kids because families are pulling them out, sending them to schools that are open 5 days a week. You know, these are huge losses. And every step of the way, you know, we have to look at and we have to review where we are as a district in a financial sense. So that's part of it as well. So community data, looking at what safety protocols and really the reason why the timing for opening schools happened when it did is because we felt like that we were in the best place at the time to open schools. Now, between September 14th and this week, if you notice, if you were listening, the data didn't change much, okay? Personally, I felt like we were in a good place because the one data point, which was the positivity rate, it was 1/10% off, but it wasn't any worse than it's been. So to me, that shows some stability, okay? And so I didn't feel like we could continue to not open schools because I felt like the data was stable, the trends were stable. okay? So, and we had one board member who dissented, who just, because they felt very strongly about having to meet that data point. Well, you know, I don't know, and I'm not going to say it, you know, I mean, he certainly has his right to that, to voice that opinion, but I don't think that would have made a huge difference. And all of our safety protocols have been enacted. Our buildings are all practicing the safety guidelines. Do we have problems? Yes. I mean, we get calls. We have a safety hotline in every single school. And when there are safety violations noted, we ask people to let us know. We've had occasions where someone was talking about the ventilation system not being good. And that's one of the huge CDC guidelines around having ventilation be appropriate and up to standard. We had to put a whole new sort of ventilation system in one school. So, I mean, yeah, so we're trying to address these kinds of things as they happen, but we feel pretty good about where our schools are right now. In addition to all that, Randy, we also have a plan for quick closure. So what happens if we start seeing a rise in cases across the city, and particularly if we see a rise in the schools? We're prepared to close, just like that. We're prepared. And it won't be anything like it was in March, because we know what to expect now. So I think that was huge. You know, in terms of the voice of the people, people want what they want. I think that we are very fortunate to be able to have the families who care enough to even express what they want. But I've been in contact with several surrounding districts, and they tell me all the time, Carolyn, I would not want to be in your shoes. I would not. And they have hearing of the public, their hearing comes, but it is nowhere near as magnified as Cincinnati Public with 36,000 kids and 6,000 employees. It's nowhere near as big. So in comparison, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. But a lot of those districts were waiting until CPS made their decision before they even made their decision.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Great.
Very. So we only have about 2 minutes left with Carolyn, but we do want to try to get one more question in. So we'll see, Brian, if you could ask your question quickly, and then Carolyn, maybe if it's possible to give a quick answer, that would be great. We could spend all night with you, Carolyn, but Brian, go for it.
I appreciate it. So I'm glad that you said that it seems like you feel like things are stabilizing, which I felt that way as well. Yet now my thinking is about the future and how are we really going to address the aftermath of COVID now that things are, quote unquote, stabilizing. So my question is, what skills, programming, or just knowledge, and let me start with just skills and knowledge or characteristics even, do you feel the board needs to be to govern the aftermath of all of this?
Wow, that's a great question, and it's a very powerful question because we've had to learn much already. One of the things I think in terms of skills, I have to say that the board members that we have now are very passionate about their work, and the skill set is there. Okay, the skill set for everybody to govern is there. I think where we have to, what we have to work on is really being focused on what the future looks like, because this planning, this COVID-19 and the planning for the reopening is really forcing us to think differently about the culture of schools and the educational climate and what that means. we'll never go back to the traditional way of doing things. And we've talked about that already. It just can't be different. So in order to do that, your personal skill set, you just have to be knowledgeable and willing to learn and willing to adapt and look at things differently. I mean, it's just as simple as that. We can't go back to the way things used to be.
So, like, to follow up, then has there been any specific gaps that you see need to be, when you say the skills of adaptability and all, like communication, technology, expertise,
Okay.
Are there any specific things that you feel need to be?
I'm going to say all of them. I'm going to say, I mean, obviously there's a gap in our system in communication and transparency. So that's a huge gap. But we've been talking about this. We've been talking about this pre-COVID, right, Elisa? I mean, Elisa was a sort of a person who really forced us to look at the way we engage the public and all that. She was very good at that. So communication transparency has been an issue for us for a while. Our strategic plan that we passed last year really focused on how we improved in community engagement. But even our strategic plan has been impacted by COVID planning. So we're having to relook that, in essence. What other gap? I think giving greater focus to what it means when we talk about closing the achievement gap. You mentioned the digital piece. We still have, and I'm not telling you anything that isn't public, and I know you want me to keep it short, Elisa. We haven't engaged with 4,000 students. That's not good. Now, we have to shoulder the responsibility for making sure that we connect. There are lots of reasons why kids connect, and let me just share. Number one, some kids have just left the district and haven't officially withdrawn. That's some of them. Others, they have the laptops, and in some instances, they have the Wi-Fi access that we provided, but they're just not connecting. So it's our job. What we're trying to do is connect with their families to make sure and all of that. So the digital piece, I think, is going to help us sort of shift, make that culture change. But we have to figure out how to make it work for everybody. So there was a lot of conversation this past meeting about the digital divide and utilizing venues like streaming and things like that. And those are conversations that we need to have. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, everyone. These were just such great questions. And I do want you to know, I know Nicole sent this out in the email to you all, but Carolyn's going to be in a virtual open house this weekend. And so on Sunday, if you do want to hear more, if you do want to ask more, on Sunday at 2:30 with the Matriots, Carolyn will be in that. It's just Carolyn for that virtual open house. So check out that email from Nicole and sign up to go to that if you'd like. But let's all thank Carolyn for her time, her transparency, for learning from her. We really just appreciate you so much, Carolyn.
Right, thank you. And as always, it's always my pleasure. And I love coming to this group. You all are a dynamic group. I say this to every group that has gone through school board school. I look forward to seeing some of you running for school board. We need you. We need new, fresh voices. Now, you can say Carolyn said that, okay? But I look forward to seeing you all in maybe even next year. How about that? Okay. Thank you so much.
I like that. I did not plant Carolyn to say that, but I agree. Thank you
I'll even
so
work
much,
with
Carolyn.
you, okay? Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Carolyn.
All right.
All right. All right. So, hey, guys, let's take a few minutes of a break. Just that was a lot to focus on and listen into. So let's all take 5 minutes and come back at 6:15, and Emma and Liz will be here. And oh, I already see they're here. So they'll be ready to go with us. So let's take 5 minutes and be back at 6:15. All right. Let's have everyone come on back. All right. So as we're all settling back in from our quick break, as soon as I heard the Element song going, I chatted into Nicole and was like, let me guess, this is Andrew's song. Andrew, tell us why you chose that song.
Yeah, hey. Naturally, I started my career in education, not only just trying to stay afloat, but as a middle school science teacher. Here Comes Science, a sick album from They Might Be Giants, dropped in 2009. And, I think it's something that we talk really hot and heavy subjects in education. And it's, we just had an hour's worth of like, let alone if you were in the meeting for 4.5 hours of like how heavy this is. But I remember when I was in the classroom, I was like, this is my time with my students. And I need them to feel the weight of all the stuff they have to endure outside of the classroom, get lifted off in order to have them here with me as I try and teach them. And so, if you caught the song, it's silly, it's uplifting, it's fun. I remember I was teaching 8th grade chemistry at the time. And it was just one of those cool little moments of like, I played that song, I don't know how many times in the classroom. And so I was like, this has to be my song because I don't know, fun, and it should be.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, and I think that ties right into what we talked about in School Board School before, right? That we can have fun doing difficult work. So I appreciate you bringing that to this. And then we started to hear the beginning of Melinda's song. So Melinda, in just like a minute or two, will you tell us why you chose that song?
I think I'll do 30 seconds. I love the song. And, sometimes I play it when I have challenging situations in my office, when students come in that might have social, emotional issues or conflict with other students. And that's my wish. That's my purpose for doing this job that I'm doing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks, Melinda. All right, so as we all settle back in, we are excited to have Liz and Emma with us for this next part of our night together where we talk about asset mapping. So we know in our last session, we talked about our group projects, why we do them, what the purpose of them is, and then we asked you all to pick which topics you might want to work on. So thanks for doing that. Nicole worked her logistical magic and put you all in groups based on the topics you wanted to work on. And so we'll share those with you towards the end of our time together. As a former teacher too, right? You always know, like, don't pass out the paper until you want everyone to look at it, right? You can't like pass it out and be like, don't look at that yet. So that's why we're not sharing that bit of knowledge until the very end. And so for pre-work, we had you watch the Impact Gap Canvas video, and we had you read a whole bunch of stuff about asset mapping, because that's going to be a really important part about how you all go about doing your group projects, right? So we know you're not the first ones to realize these are problems in our community. We know there's lots of people already working on these issues, and there's a lot of community members with expertise here. And so we want to thank Emma and Liz for coming and leading us through some work around asset mapping, and as we start to think about how we're going to work on these group projects. So I'm going to turn it over to Emma and Liz for our rest of our time here.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction. I am going to pull up the PowerPoint, if that is okay. And let's see. And Liz is actually going to kick us off to get us started.
Hi, thank you guys for having us. We really appreciate it. So the Community Building Institute has been around for like 25 years, and it was a partnership between Xavier and United Way and all kinds of folks who a long time ago went to Northwestern University and heard John McKnight and Jody Kretzman talk about asset-based community development. And folks from Cincinnati thought, man, this is it. This is our community needs to learn how to do this work. And so really for all that time, on and off, we've been training on this idea. And it really is an idea. We also work broadly in planning and lots of other things, but I really want to focus tonight on what asset-based community development is all about in our mind, and how that sort of, how that is how we approach all the work that we do, whether we're training on this or anything else we're doing. Next slide, Emma. Thank you. So I know that you guys, one of the things that you were asked to do was interview somebody. And you all got to interview one other person, and you were asked to ask some particular questions. These questions: what was your favorite memory about school when you were a kid? Talk about the kind of networks you have in your community, the role that you play in your community, and then what you're looking forward to in this short-term project. So maybe if I could ask, what did people talk about? Anybody willing to share what they talked about? Anything interesting, fascinating, surprising that somebody said to you, or that you said out loud for the first time, maybe? Come on, I know this is hard, but it's more fun when we all talk. I'm not that great.
I did the raise my hand gesture, but I'm not.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I had Lauren Razor, and so what was interesting to us is to what both of us had what was really important to us were our friendships during our greatest memory. A lot of it revolved around our friendships and our support base. So I was thinking into today with like my kids of what would they say the same thing.
Yeah. Other folks, things that came out as you interviewed each other?
We both had a hard time I did at least had a hard time remembering grade school, because that was a long time ago for me. But when I started thinking about it, I was surprised that the thing that stood out for me was how much I loved being in science fairs and all the memories of science fairs.
That's very cool. Other thoughts, other things that came to you as you were doing your interview?
I think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I'll go. I had Quinice, it was Dawn and Quinice. And so one of the memories that I told her about was when I was in kindergarten. I had the same teacher, her name was Miss Holmes, and she taught us a song, and I don't know why, don't ask me why I remember this song, but she was from Africa. And so she taught us a song. I can't remember exactly what it meant. It's something like "Have a nice day," but I'll share it with you, because it's just funny that I even remember this, because I was so young. But it was Congo, Congo, Umalaka, Umaye, Umalaka, Umaye, Umde, Umde. Don't know why I remember that, but I remembered it.
Because it's cool. That's why.
I mean, so I grew up in the community of Madisonville, and we used to have a grade school. It's now John P. Parker, but it went from Lyons, Anderson Place, and then John P. Parker. So it was Madisonville, and her name was Miss Holmes. And I don't know why I remember that song, but
it mattered to you. That's very cool. A couple of other people, anything that surprised you that you heard, or that, like I said, or that you said, like you remembered a song from a long time ago? All right, so let me tell you, there's a little bit of, these seem like very simple questions, right? What were your good memories about when you were in school? What are your networks? What do you need to be successful? There's a little bit of intentionality to these questions. The first part of it is we ask you to be positive. What are your best memories? What are your networks? What works for you? What do you contribute? I have over the years decided that I think we are so programmed to talk about what doesn't work and what we're unhappy about and what kind of crap we experience today. It's just, I mean, we're hardwired to do it almost. And so what you're asking people to do when you do these appreciative inquiries, positive questions, is you sort of force people to change their perspective a little bit. And I think that what you heard in everything that you all said, friendship is important, science fairs are important, this song is important. Maybe the fact that your teacher was from another place was important. I mean, that's how you tease out the things that are valuable and the things that we care about and that matter to us. The other thing I'll say, when asked, what do you contribute? There's an assumption that you contribute and that you have value and that you have skills and resources to bring to the table. And I'll tell you, I cannot say how important that is. So many times, particularly people in poor, disinvested neighborhoods, all the deficit words we use to describe places, nobody asks them what they have to contribute. And when you do, it's a powerful question. So that's a little bit about what we did in that very simple way to get introduced to one another. Valerie, Emma, are we going the other way? There we go. So there's all kinds of background on asset-based community development, and we've got some resources for you at the back of the presentation. So I'm not gonna sort of do the long drawn out version, but what I'm gonna suggest to you is that this is this notion of approaching issues and problems from an asset-based perspective is really important. Go again, Emma. Go one more time. So there we go. So asset-based community development is a term that was developed to talk about neighborhood revitalization and development. But I would suggest to you that all kinds of disciplines are trying to work more from strengths than from deficits. Psychology is talking about resilience. What does it take to build someone's resilience, as opposed to what's wrong with this person, right? Medicine is slowly, painfully trying to think about what is it to promote health and not attack disease. I mean, listen to the words that we even say, right? I mean, it's a totally different perspective than what we're used to. We're used to, and for many of you who are sociologists in the room or planners or whatever, it's like we do needs assessments. Our job is to analyze something, some child, some neighborhood, some parent, figure out what's wrong with them and tell them how to fix it. And so this whole notion of trying to approach an issue or a place or a person or a family or a kid or whatever, a classroom, from an asset-based perspective is really it's a change in mindset. So maybe that's enough of that. But it's a big deal, and it sounds like a little switch, but it's a huge change. Emma, next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly go through. So Ignite and Kretzmann found the guys who formulated this whole notion of asset-based community development asked themselves a question at the beginning of their research, which is, there's a lot of investment and a lot of energy, a lot of social service activity, a lot of money spent on trying to improve poor neighborhoods, and we just don't seem to be getting it right. They said, is there anywhere where people are getting it right, where things are improving as intentionality and investment is taking place? And the answers that they came up with were that in places where neighborhoods are getting better, where quality of life is improving, where educational outcomes are improving, where health outcomes are improving, pick your metric, these things are happening. Communities are focusing on assets, not deficits, which is not to say, this is not about rose-colored glasses. When I say people are focusing on assets, it is your asset you need to solve a problem. It's not to say you don't recognize problems or you just, pretend like everything is wonderful. But you have to take a little bit of a stock of what you have to work with, what your assets are, before you can decide how you're going to approach whatever it is you want to change. The other thing that McKnight talked about was that neighborhoods that were being successful were internally focused. In other words, they looked to themselves to solve problems. When the answer is always an outside professional, you're not really building capacity in a community. If you look to the resources and the talents that people have in neighborhoods and draw them out, what can you contribute? It really changes the nature of the conversation and the nature of how community participates with you. The other is that things were comprehensively worked on. So it's not just, it isn't, and this is a hard thing to say because it sounds overwhelming when I say it, you can't just work on education. We now know, and it's not just about a job, just about housing. It's about all those things. And kids do well in school when they're fed and they're loved and their trauma is addressed and they have internet that works and they have a stable house, right? And so it sounds overwhelming to say that part of this is about being comprehensive. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything. It means you have to have networks and people who are working on lots of things all at one time. The other thing is that in communities that work, it's about relationships. We all know this instinctively, like we do things because our sister asked us, or our girlfriend asked us, or our husband asked us. And when somebody throws a flyer on my front porch, and then I don't come to a meeting, and everybody says, well, obviously you don't care about your kids, you didn't come to our meeting. It's like, that's not how it works, right? And we instinctively know this about our own selves, but we don't always, I think, treat communities with the same kind of respect or the same kind of expectation that we have for our sisters. I do what my sister Sarah asked me to do. And that citizens or parents or families are at the center of the conversation. So maybe that's enough of that. And like I said, there's plenty of this in the material that we have provided. So I'm gonna leave you with this. The way that we do things, the way that we normally do things, the way that I used to do things, I'm a planner, my background is in community planning, is that we focus on deficits. We do this, you know, the needs assessment. I always say, I'm a planner, I can map, graph, and chart deficits like nobody's business. I can tell you how many single moms, how many crappy houses, how many vacant properties, crime rates. I mean, we're great at that. We all know how to do that. What we don't always know how to do is figure out what the assets are. If we spend as much energy on the asset inventory, we would be in a very different place. So you see this, and all of these words see people as clients as opposed to see people as citizens. Those seem like little words, and they are, but the perspective that you bring when you say somebody is a citizen of this community, they are a parent with responsibilities, and they have assets to bring to the table is a way different way to look at that person than this is a client to be supported and fixed. Fixed people, there we go. So I don't have to go through all of this, but as I say, I think it is, as you go through the exercise, even tonight, and you won't get to if I don't shut up here in a minute, but as you go through the exercise, and as you go through your project, this is a muscle that we have to work, right? We have to be intentional about focusing on assets. And so the encouragement of this frame, I think, is just to encourage you to work on that muscle a little bit. Okay, I'm done. Emma, I know is going to take it from here.
All right, thank you, Liz. So I'm just going to go through quickly so that we all have time to do a quick activity. Go through quickly two key tools that we use for asset-based community development. And Nicole really wanted us to talk about asset mapping. So I'm going to first focus on asset mapping and then talk a little bit more about appreciative inquiry. But in terms of tools for practicing asset-based community development or asset-based approaches, there's some tools listed here, and there's significantly more detail in all of the readings about these. Nothing that you've not heard of before, but certainly helpful tools to remember, especially as you guys start your projects. So in terms of asset mapping, and when we say this, I think it can seem rather obvious, but one of the key points of this is defining your community or study area. So for us at the Community Building Institute, this often means a neighborhood, but this can also be an issue area, a set of neighborhoods, a school, a district, etc. So it's really important as you set out to do asset mapping to define that for yourself and determine what you want to do with the information that you gather. The sort of, I think my my starting place is always to like go really wide. I think sometimes here when you're talking about asset mapping, starting small is helpful and is important, because then you really get down to the details and the assets that you actually want. Another important part, as Liz sort of alluded to, is identifying or talking to local folks or people who've been involved in this work for many years to learn what previous asset mapping they might have done. And that's what's really where interviewing comes in, talking with folks who are on the ground every day. I know in the work that we do in certain neighborhoods, they get a new questionnaire every other month from some agency that wants to learn more about what they're doing. And the more that you can not be a part of that and ask for what has been previously done and review it, I think the better everybody is off. As Liz talked about, and I'm going to go through the different types of assets quickly, mapping the community assets. I think the other part of this is it's not meant to ignore issues and needs. It's certainly a huge part of all of the work that you guys will do. And so asset mapping is not intended to exclude those, but certainly to put assets at the forefront. So the three main types of assets that you'll see, probably saw in the materials and that you'll see in our maps tonight are individual assets, associations, and institutions. So individuals is pretty obvious. Associations we'll talk about. So individual assets, I'll go back to that quickly. Individual assets can be lots of different things. You guys started out in your interviews commenting on individual assets or individual memories that you have. These things I think are extremely valuable, specifically relationships and networks. When you get into communities or into schools, it's often you find that one caretaker or that one grandmother or that one teacher that's been there for 3 decades that has so much institutional knowledge that is so valuable in a project big sense and in outcomes for students many times.
Emma, you know, poor Emma, I do this on occasion. I'm gonna break in.
Always, Liz. You're good.
If you think about, I can guarantee you in every single classroom and every single school building in CPS, there are at least a couple of parents who have got it going on, right? Their kids are there, they're getting stuff done. They have figured out how to make it work for them and their families in the neighborhood that everybody else is living in. Find those people and enlist their help. Somebody has figured out how to do it right, and they probably have networks to other families in the building. So find them and enlist them, and think about how wonderful that makes a mom feel who's got 3 little ones who are getting it together, who have their socks matching and their shoes matching, and everybody's in the building. I mean, when I had 2, I can't even believe I ever could get that done. But somebody is doing it. Highlight them, lift them up, and enlist them as your partner. Yeah.
So quickly, associational assets, these look different in many different communities and many different settings. These are your sports teams, your church groups, your business groups, but I think these are probably some of the most important assets in communities and in civic work. These are typically volunteer organizations or groups of volunteers, but are really important and foundational building blocks to asset mapping.
You know, there was a really great recommendation, and to be honest with you, it was in Avondale. We did an Avondale plan a million years ago, and I'm not sure it ever got implemented, but I thought it was great to have a program where all the teachers it was at Rockdale at the time, get briefed on all of the resources that are available in Avondale. Because they may not be from Avondale and they may not know that there's a Boys and Girls Club, that the Hirsch Rec Center just got renovated, that, you know, Gabriel's Place is right down the street, so that they know what the resources that they might tap when they have an issue are that are outside the school building. Because there's a ton of world going on outside the school building, and it's not all bad. A lot of it is good.
So the last sort of category of assets is institutional assets. So Liz just mentioned some of those. libraries, schools, rec centers, churches. These are probably, if you think of assets, just if somebody throws out those terms, this might be where your brain goes, or at least this is probably where my brain goes right away. And I think these are more the obvious assets that are more than likely physical and can be seen and have a presence in a community. So I will go through this quickly, and there is a blank document in the pre-work material that we provided for you that can allow you to sort of manipulate one of these for your project if you would like. So again, these highlight positive assets in the community, I think big or small. So artists, seniors, and youth can be individual assets. And again, you can see sort of just the tiers that come out here. And this is in pretty stark contrast to a needs map. And I think our world and organizations are more accustomed to doing a needs map. And you can see the difference. And in many cases, I think this creates sort of a roadblock to getting anywhere, because most of these things need a lot of funding and are institutionalized, pretty serious issues. So,
and we all know that to get money for anything, you got to talk about just how crappy it is. I mean, we do this stuff because we're asked to do this stuff.
And so again, it's not, certainly we don't present these as something that you don't need to ignore the needs map, but starting with the asset map, excuse me, helps to solve the needs map. So again, here, Liz talked about treating residents or people as clients, which really leads to perpetuating and internalizing deficiencies. I think something that I have learned in my work with the Community Building Institute, the consequences of a needs map and looking at deficits, how much that destroys local relationships in a community. I think as you spend more time with communities or with groups, the more outside relationships or outside burdens or strains that are put on local residents, the more that their relationships are stressed and overlooked. Again, this magnifies deficiencies, and as Liz sort of alluded to, unfortunately, our system of funding is set up to reward failure. So while funders want to see positive outcomes for funding, the existence of failure or issues are always the things that are funded. So I'm gonna also highlight quickly again and have Liz touch on this as well. We talked about appreciative inquiry at the very beginning and gave you a couple of examples. The intentional positive questions are really something that we would recommend using at the beginning of sort of a community exploration process that you may go through to identify assets. They are really good sort of icebreakers, for lack of a better term, for people to use to start people down a path of talking about their strengths and talking about new possibilities. I think I am a pretty borderline pessimistic person sometimes, and so Liz and the folks at CBI have taught me, truly taught me, the importance of getting people to talk about their strengths and about their positive memories, stuff like that. I would say these types of questioning activities, we are learning during virtual trainings and during COVID, but these types of activities we allow a significant amount of time for. And sometimes it seems like too much time, but it's relationship building time, it's networking time, and it's really important to allow in terms of, getting to know folks and getting to know communities and groups. And we have some sample questions here. There's also some resources at the end that could provide you with ideas and of other questions as well. Liz, do you have any other comments?
I have like a million things to say, but I want to get them. I want you guys to get to your session. The one thing I will say is it's amazing how much more pleasant and informative it is to ask people about assets rather than to talk about deficits. It just is a lot more pleasant. And I will also say to this, to ask you, what was your best memory of school? That's not a trite question. What I heard you say is people like hands-on experience, music matters, friendships and relationships matter. You can turn those into some pretty deep understandings as you think about what to do next. So that's enough of me.
Alrighty, so this is what I'm gonna call on Nicole for some assistance. So we're gonna do a quick activity, about 15 minutes, if that's still okay, and break up and have you go through a scenario that we've provided. And then there's some prompt questions at the bottom of the scenario we'll have you read through with your group and come back to the larger group prepared to share out on the. So Nicole, are you gonna logistic split us up?
Yes. Yep, so Kendall is going to be chatting in the link. She just chatted in the link for the document. So we're going to be breaking out into 4 groups. Groups 1 and 2, so pay attention to your number when you get sent to the breakout rooms. Groups 1 and 2 will look at scenario 1, and groups 3 and 4 will look at scenario 2.
And just to clarify, do we still have about 15 minutes, Nicole?
Yep, we'll bring everyone back around 7.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to open the rooms now, and feel free to request help if you need any assistance while you're in those breakouts. Do you all want to just take a minute to read it silently and then come back together? Okay.
Sounds good.
Hey, Pepper, where's the battery? I can put the batteries in there and everything else. I can put it in here. Put that back, Emma.
All right, are we just reading scenario 1, right? Okay. Everybody ready to come back together?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm ready too.
Okay.
I guess I'll go. I like to start. So I feel like one of the things that, and this is happening just today's area, that we tend not to ask the youth of what they would like for us to help them with, if that makes any sense, because they don't have the advantage to be like, hey, I want to set this up or do this, or don't have the means or the resource to do that. So if there's a community center right up the center, and we see that they like to play chess or whatever activity they enjoy, how about we come and like get that established? Or is there someone within the senior population that would like to teach them? Here the chessboard is there, right? But maybe they just don't know how to play, but they're wanting to. So first, I think the most important thing is meeting everybody where they're at. And typically with young people, they're not going to ask you at all. I have 2 teenagers, and like, I don't even know why they're angry. So we have to like, seriously, we have to like inquire and ask. And sometimes we have to like, go about it different ways, So I think that could be a start.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd like to ask about, I don't think that's possible, but ask about the officer who knows many of the teenagers, like what the communication style is there and what that method was like. Because I think people write the younger generation off in a way that, if you approach this group of teenagers and say like, there are senior citizens inside who'd like to go outside past the stoop and they feel like there's no room, would you be willing to help them go from their rooms to downstairs or escort them somewhere? Like, just make them aware of the situation instead of saying like, you shouldn't be here, you're causing a lot of issues, there's so much noise, etc. Like looking for opportunities for them to help the situation instead of just, you're causing this issue, you should leave. Does anybody have any assets that they can identify that might have been overlooked?
So one of the things that it talks about, like untraditional assets, and they mention, that some of the young people might be drug dealers, and like for most people, there's like no positive connotation that you can gain from that. But I'm thinking of like, what are the competencies and skills, right? Like, are you a relationship person? Do you have power of influence over other young people in that neighborhood, right? And if you are then engaged in a more constructive way, like, are you able to bring others with you?
Yeah. Almost like somebody looking at a robber or like a burglar that does it in a really smart way and being like, wow, I would have never thought of that. Like they must be really good at masterminding things and coming up with solutions, and that's an asset. It might be used with a negative connotation, but it is what it is.
You would also think that there are relationships, if it's a community in a large enough building, you would think some of the kids would have some relationships to someone that lives there already, who could be, like they were talking about, informal associations, like relatives, or someone's relative knows someone there, and just kind of leveraging those kinds of informal relationships, because I think sometimes that's how messages get passed within a community, is through those friendships and through relatives, so that could get addressed or brought up that way.
And overall, I just feel like in order to figure these things out, and I think it was Emma that said that, it's starting those questions, asking those little questions like, you know, tell me about your school, or tell me about your favorite food, asking those type of questions that lead into bigger answers. Because sometimes, like, you can go up and you can say, well, what can we do to make this thing better for you? And you won't get no response. But then you can go up and say, well, who's your favorite basketball player? Or like, what's the favorite brand Jordan, or something that's intriguing to them, that meets them on their level to pull out. And then once you're speaking with a group of people, like, I remember realize who are the people that's going to like come out and present themselves more, and then that's how you can see who can kind of be a leader and things like that. And then you can start to formulate with different conversations with them. So it's like the little things I think Emma was saying earlier.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier this idea that like they're bringing, you know, a chess table, but they're not really playing. And I don't know if you directly made the connection or if it was implied of like, how do you bridge that multi-generational gap, right? Like build the relationships with the young people and the elderly, and I'm sure that there are some elderly folks that like know and love how to play chess. Like, is that something that can be integrated there? They talk about the carry out business, right? Like, can that be a place of employment for some of these young people, and it's not a deterrent for the elderly that you know, that they depend on for their business?
Yeah, I was thinking about the carry out. What if the manager of that carry out can offer to pay the young people to deliver the food to the senior citizens?
Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about relationships in general, but I keep coming back to the whole, it says most of the seniors find the behavior offensive and even intimidating. Some believe drugs are being sold on the premises when some people have spoken up. Like, it's always most or some. And I'm thinking about like, well, where are the senior citizens who are like, I don't really care, or I don't mind this at all, or I actually like having kids outside my stoop. Like, the reason I said at the beginning, like, this reminds me of my neighborhood, is like Low Price Home West Side had this similar thing happen outside of one of our senior citizen buildings, but like, it was like Lauren said, it was like two people's grandma lived there and they just stayed there, and their friends, you know, they were influencers enough that their friends were just like hanging out with them outside of the building, and some of their friends were into drugs and some of their friends were into criminal activities, but these two weren't, and like a few of the kids in the group weren't. And so it seems, relationship wise, I'm like, I don't know, I'm trying to like pare down what actually is the issue here, because if there's a group of 10 kids and like 3 of them are drug dealers, that means 7 of them aren't, and 7 of them are just hanging out. So I guess my question would be like, is that a problem? If you were to like get the drug dealers to work either with the carry out people or with the senior citizen people, or get the kids to kind of lower their volume and hang out with the senior citizens, what have you, is that the issue? Or is the issue just like, there's a group of kids outside and I don't want a group of kids outside on my stoop? Because those are 2 completely separate issues. In one, it's like, we can fix the issue. And in the other, it's like, well, you don't care if the kids are like the most well-behaved, respectable kids out there, you just don't want them on your stoop. And those are different issues to like look at and require different assets. Also, I'm surprised that they've called the police. That's not just weird to me. I'm surprised the managers have called the police a few times. And like, it says, it doesn't say his intervention doesn't help. It just says it doesn't seem to help for very long.
Well, it sounds to me like those managers may not be assets to whatever issue is trying to be solved, because they have kind of one mode of trying to figure something out.
Also, the community center down the street. The only reason I can think that, the first reason that comes up in my head for why people wouldn't be going to the community center is because it's either A, not fun, which I've seen in certain neighborhoods where it's like there's nothing to do there, so why would I hang out there? Or B, there are certain rules that have banned certain kids from hanging out there. So like, if my friend isn't there, why would I go there? I want to hang out with my friend. So I think maybe having, like, even the community center is an institutional asset, but like figuring out why that institutional asset isn't working for the neighborhood. Because if it's a community center, why is it not working for the community?
And then like researching what community centers are having success. Like what assets do they have and how do you replicate that?
Like, do you have game nights at your community center where these kids can hang out and play board games and card games? Do you have somebody there who could invite a few, you know, put up poster flyers in the community and invite people to come and learn chess? That way the kids could come, senior citizens, if they wanted to come learn chess or play chess, could play as well. And they're all kind of gathering in that community center so that it's not just like, oh, that's for the youth and they go over there. I'm just like, I don't know, in my neighborhood, I don't know, maybe it's because in my neighborhood growing up, everybody knew everybody. So it was like, it wasn't, if there was an issue, it was like, you knew who that person's grandma was and you could go talk to their grandma. But like, if the community center doesn't know the teens or the teens don't know their grandmas, like, does anybody know each other outside of their little group?
I was also
I'm glad you brought up the seniors. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I'll be brief. I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought up the seniors and how, you know, it says the seniors wonder why the kids won't go use the center. And I think the question you were really asking back is, why aren't the seniors using the community center? And it really feels to me like that's the problem, is the community center.
I also think teenagers just think going to a community center and like a defined space for especially like teenagers who are trying to be cool, that might just not be like the cool thing to do. So it also could be like listening to the kids and thinking of what feels like appropriate to them, or finding the leader of the group and trying to get the leader in like engaged in it, and then the others would follow.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was muted. Go ahead, Liz.
Emma, are you going or me?
Well, so I think just we have 7 minutes left. If we can take a couple minutes for the first group to share out sort of what your plan was for addressing the issue that you had, and remind us which one you had. I should have said before that we should have designated a spokesperson, but I think we can wing that.
I guess I'll go. I think I was I group one, right, Brian? We were one.
I think
yeah.
we were two. Oh, scenario one.
We were scenario one.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Go ahead, Don.
So we were in group 2. We had the scenario 1, and this one was about the senior citizens building with the teenagers and the community center and the store owner. And so I think we all agreed that by engaging all three, the teenagers, the community, the senior citizens building, the store owner, engaging all of them together to come up with one common goal, maybe asking the store owner, you know, if he could create some jobs for the teenagers, you know, maybe $15 for sweep the, you know, whatever, or just kind of asking the senior citizens what would they like, you know, to see from the teenagers, because maybe it was just that the foul language, you know, maybe if they were more respectful, maybe they would want to engage them and have some dialogue, but also utilizing the community center to create an outlet for them to go where they can get, you know, being taught respect, or, you know, any other things that will be available to them at the community. I think by walking away, by engaging all of those community people and walking away with with a tangible goal, which is, you know, being able to communicate and share the common goal. Like, we all want something from each other. The senior citizens want the children to be respectful. The store owner don't want to hear them shoving and pushing in front of his, his store. And then the community center, they need the children. And so let's get them engaged that way. I think that's what we all walked away with. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, or I think.
That sounds perfect.
Emma.
That's great. Which kind of representative from the other group that had scenario one report out any additional assets or anything different that you guys came up with? Anybody?
We had the same question to us about scenario, and pretty much we came up with the same and just trying to meet the teenagers where they at, and as well as the seniors, and just being able to like see where we can meet them at. So it's pretty much the same.
Did your group talk at all about any association assets?
We did talk about the community center. I think that's all. If anybody else want to chime in and seeing what like we can offer and stuff like that. And also we talked about why the youth didn't want to go to the community center. Could it be because it's not fun? Could it be because, the people they don't know is not there, and things like that as well?
I can add that we talked about, I brought up the relationships within the neighborhood, and that aspect was very interesting to me, how it said most of the senior citizens may not have liked certain things that were happening, and I immediately, thinking of my own neighborhood, thought of like the relationships there, whether there was a kid or two who had a grandparent or a family friend that lived in that apartment building. And we also brought up how the kids were playing cards and had a chessboard but didn't know, so maybe there was a way for, the community center to offer like a space for people to learn chess, and the senior citizens could come in and, if your senior citizen knew chess, could come in and play chess or even learn chess themselves. And then you're building relationships between the senior citizens and the teenagers, so that there's, at least I told them, at least in my neighborhood, it was all about relationships and who you knew. It didn't matter like rule wise or law wise, if you said this is what you're not supposed to do or whatever. It mattered that like I knew someone's grandmother and I could go talk to somebody's grandma, or I knew somebody's cousin. That was what mattered, and that was what helped people actually go where they were going to go or do what they were going to do.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out. I think our group, I sat in on the other group that had the scenario. We sort of started to touch on that stuff as well at the very end. So just one of the groups that had scenario 2, do you mind starting and just reporting out quickly, a quick summary maybe of the scenario and what you guys talked about in terms of addressing the issue with an asset-based model?
I'll go. Our scenario, we were members of a community organization that had really strong ties to a particular community and actually worked out of the local middle school. And there's a community developer coming in, working with the city that wants to, or that has plans to transform the community park. The park right now is used for the kids in the neighborhood as an after-school hangout place. Families go there. It seemed like it was a really important part of the community, and the developer wants to have like a nature-based landscape, a gazebo, a bandstand, a beer stand, and all sorts of other things. And what they want our community group to do is to get the community on board with this park. And I think what we came away with is that it sounded like a step towards gentrification, and that there was some real concern that we would use our relationship with the community to get them to buy in on something that they had not had any input on and did not seem like it was designed with their needs in mind. So we thought about, is there a way to get members of the community through maybe a community council, through the middle school that's right next to the park, and some other ways to become advisors to the developers and come up with ideas, including things like making sure that housing stays affordable and that the park is designed to meet the needs that it currently serves in the community. Was there a way for us to use those local assets to get more community input and to get some leverage into what the final design looked like?
Thank you. Final group want to add anything about scenario 2?
We had a lot of similar ideas as the previous group. And we really saw it as, you know, the community has been really left out of the decision-making process so far. And so really focusing on getting their voice in order to, and like getting the right people at the table, and making the conversation less about like redesigning this park, because obviously people like this park already, they're already coming to it, and there's a lot of assets already there. So we talked more about this idea of like, well, maybe what's missing in the park that the community would really want. So really focusing on hearing the voices of the community and bringing them into the conversation, and then doing some sort of analysis to identify like what are additional wants or needs.
Thank you. So, and it looks like I'm going back and forth between the chat. It looks like a couple folks are sharing really great information that will be helpful for you guys too. So in the interest of time, Liz, I'm sure you will have some stuff to add about the scenarios. I think those scenarios are you guys did a great job with going towards the asset lens. I think those scenarios are things that you'll face, similar to what you'll face when you guys select your project and your issue. I think taking the time up front to explore the different assets, a couple of the groups suggested interviewing or talking with the youth that are hanging out and finding out what they like to do, things like that. That sort of listening lens from the beginning is really important to asset mapping and asset-based community work. I would encourage to take as much time as you guys have to do things like that. And in the world of COVID, that's more difficult. But I would encourage you, as you feel safe and as you can, to take time to listen and sit with people and learn from them, and do interviews, whether formal or informal. I think part of this asset mapping work and asset-based community development work is building trust with people. And that sounds simplistic and silly, but a couple of you mentioned in the scenario too that you know, you feel like the community's voice was left out, and that time and time again erodes trust. So taking the time as you guys work through some projects to build trust with people is important. And something, as we talked about this training in the very beginning, I think these issues in both scenarios and some of the other issues we've talked about tonight are complex. They come with broad societal issues, they come with place-based issues, they come with personalities, they come with all sorts of different things that are complex and make the issues oftentimes sort of overshadow progress and assets. And so I would encourage you guys, as you work on your projects, to hone in on small wins that you guys can accomplish within the time of your projects. I think you guys will do great work, but trying not to solve all the problems at once. You guys can leave a lasting impact on communities and projects that you work on if you create connections in communities and sort of leave the residents or people in the community to continue to do the work after you guys are gone. So I would just encourage you to celebrate the small wins and to focus on things that are achievable within your time frame. Liz, do you have anything else to add? I know we're sort of short on time.
Maybe just the last thing I'll say to follow up on what you just said, Emma, the small wins, the relationships, it's like that is the work. people act like, oh, we have to do this just so that we can get to the part that we're supposed to do. It's like, this is the work. And I think it's important, so it's valuable.
And
Don.
You guys have already, I think, within your network started sharing some additional resources. I will share this PowerPoint so that you guys can look at these slides. The ABCD Institute has lots of wonderful resources. There's some appreciative inquiry information. I know some folks mentioned strength surveys or VIA surveys. I don't know if you guys go through that process here, but those are great resources to use as well to understand your own strengths. And then finally, you guys may all be familiar with this, but just in case, resources about communities in Cincinnati and where you can learn a little bit more about some of the work that neighborhood groups are doing in our region. And lastly, Nicole, and Elisa, I don't know if we have any time for questions, but wanted to say thank you for having us and thank you for allowing us to have some of your time. And wanted to offer, certainly there's a lot more that we could talk about. So if anybody has questions or wants to talk further, both Liz and I would love to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Emma and Liz. This was just a really, really interesting conversation and just a great time to start thinking as we dive into our group projects. And so we are going to reveal our group projects in just a second. But before we do that, I just want to thank Emma and Liz for their time and sharing their expertise. This really just kicks us off in such a strong spot. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Emma and Liz. If everyone wants to chat in or take yourself off, and go ahead and feel free to yell a thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Good luck on your project.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So now Nicole is going to share her screen with us, and she is going to share our group project groups. She's like, wait a minute, I'm doing 100 things here right now. I'm also sharing art. So she's going to share those. And while she's putting those up there, oh, here we go. While she's putting those up there, I'll let you know that in your group projects folder, so in the participant folder now, there's a group projects folder. And in that folder, there are subfolders for each of these groups now, okay? So here are your groups. I'll give you a second to find yourself on it. So then in the group projects folder, there's now folders for each of those, and we made those folders just to help you all stay organized, right? So if, Kate finds some great research, she doesn't have to kind of send it as an attachment to an email. And then if Brian is in her group too, and he's like, wait, I think Kate sent us something, right? Like instead, Kate can just put it in this folder, and everybody has access to the same folder. We decided it would be a great kind of way for you to organize your stuff. So if you go on the group projects folder, you'll now see those subfolders. The first thing that you all will need to do is just plan for your first meeting. So just decide when you want to meet for the first time. And we also, in that group projects folder, we have a suggested agenda for that first meeting. So remember, those meetings will happen outside of your session time. After the first one, it's up to you what you want to do, but we just thought it might be helpful to have a little bit of structure. So you'll see in that agenda, at that first meeting, we suggest you do things like share your why, right? Like, why did you choose this topic? Why are you passionate about it? That's important for your group to know. And then also share some of your assets, right? So hopefully you all will have the same conversation with each other. What am I bringing to this group? What knowledge, what skills, what talents do I have? So that as you're divvying up work, you can say like, oh, wait, you're really good at data analysis, you take on that piece. Or like, you love writing, you take on this piece. So really thinking about what the assets are that you're going to bring to that group. So we suggest you do that. And then you'll see in there's other suggestions too, right? About, setting consistent meeting times, et cetera. So at the very end tonight, we're going to put you all into some Zoom rooms right when we close out with your group project group, so that you can use like 2 minutes while we're all still together to set that first meeting time. Or if people have to go, you can go into that Zoom room and be like, hey guys, let's just set it via email, right? But we just wanted to give you a minute together to maybe set that first meeting time. So that's what we will do next, or at the very end. That'll be your next step. But we're excited. We think this is a great project that you all have picked. And then I just want to reiterate what Liz said. I know I said it last session too, but like small wins, right? Like all those projects are huge, the topics you just saw. And so just a reminder, this is not a dissertation. This is a small bite that you're going to take off. So as you all are thinking about this and starting to do the research, figure out like, what is this little thing we might be able to do to move this big topic forward? So we are going to take just about 5 minutes in our home teams to just debrief tonight. That was a lot, right? Between talking with Carolyn, all the asset mapping stuff. So just 5 minutes together. We know it's never enough time, but these reflection times are meant to just be a start for you. So we're going to take 5 minutes together in your home teams and just debrief and start reflecting together on all you heard tonight. And then we'll come back together for some logistics and, like we said, to set those first meeting times. So why don't we go ahead and go into our home teams for 5 minutes. I think we got everyone back. All right, so we know it is never enough time with our home teams, but hopefully that is just the beginning, right? So we know that, you know, you can always touch base outside of your time together and just continue reflecting on all that we've heard. And then, of course, I know some of you have reached out to Nicole and me between sessions too, if you want to process stuff or have questions, and we are always happy to jump on the phone or via email, whatever is easiest. So we just want to remind you that we are here. You've got your home teams, all that good stuff. So to keep processing all your learning. So we want to really quickly go over some logistics for our next couple sessions together. So our next couple sessions, again, are like right in a row. So we have session 6, 7, and 8 all within a couple weeks of each other. So our next one is another biggie we're super excited about. So this is our systems change session. And as you can see here, we have Colin Groth from Strive Together and Jasmine Kostin, who is from Councilmember Sittenfeld's office. And she also is a alum of School Board School Class 1. So they co-facilitate this session. And we've divided it up over 2 different weekends. So the first weekend we'll come together, we talk about systems and tools for changing them. And then in between, we go do some virtual school visits. So we kind of see we're having all of the systems change stuff in our head. We go see these schools that are doing really interesting, innovative work. And then we come back for the second part of the systems change session where we really talk about, great, so now that we know all this, how do you change a system? So we've got the systems change session, our school visits. Those of you who are in Cincinnati know there are some schools everybody knows in CPS, right? But there are some schools no one ever talks about, but are doing like really amazing things on their campuses. And so we're excited to introduce you. If you don't know, Mr. Grant from Westwood and Ms. Votel from Aiken, we're excited to introduce you to them. Of course, we can't go into their schools this year, but they're coming to us. So we'll get to meet them. They're going to have some of their teachers, some of their students with them. So really great conversations about what's happening at their schools. And then right after that, we have our session on big issues in education. And we have lots of great guests coming for that to talk at the national and local levels. What are some of those big issues? And then some folks just who focus on teacher recruitment, training, prep, and support, because we know the teachers in the classroom is really the biggest influencer on kids and the culture of a classroom and their ability to succeed. So we've got a lot of those in a row. So we already made live all 3 prep work for all of the 3 of those sessions, so that if you want to check them out and get started early, pace yourself, you have access to all of those. Let's see. And before we hop out, though, we also wanted Kate and Sally, y'all are planning a session. And so we wanted to know, based on last session, and so many of your classmates wanting to know more about LSDMCs, you started pulling something together. So do you want to take a minute and tell us about that?
Sure, yeah, we, Kate and I are both on LSDMCs at our kids' schools at Spencer and Clark. And a bunch of you had reached out asking if we could get on the phone to talk about what is LSDMC and what does it do. And in full transparency, Kate and I are both very new on LSDMC, so we're learning, but we don't know that much. So Elisa helped us out and got some previous school board school alum to join the club, and they have a lot of LSDMC experience. So It'll be about an hour panel discussion style, and we'll just be asking questions of the guests of what is LSDMC, what is the role, how do you get on an LSDMC, when they function well, why do they function well, when they don't, why don't they, just things like that. So I think Nicole already sent out the invitation to everybody.
I'm gonna send it right after this because I wanted you to announce it first so that you didn't get a random invite. Yeah.
Okay. So it's scheduled for next Friday, October 2nd, 5 p.m.
Great. All right. So go ahead and you'll be on the lookout. Nicole will send you the Zoom link to that. But thanks, Kate and Sally, for just stepping up and saying, people want to know about this, we'll organize something. So that's awesome. So we're excited for that. So 2 last things before we all hop out. 1, don't forget to do your survey. So we'll chat in the link to that, but it's also in your participant guide. So do that survey for tonight. And then number 2, we're going to put you in Zoom rooms with your group project group. And remember, this is just to decide on your first meeting date and time. Or if people need to jump, feel free to go into that room and say, I don't have time right now. Oh. Sorry, I'm echoing with somebody. Yeah, that we don't have time right now, but let's do this via email, okay? You don't have to come back to the main room. Just after you're done figuring this out with your group, you can head out for the night. But we want to thank you all again for your engagement. You always have such great questions and ideas. It's always so energizing to be around you all. So again, don't forget those surveys and have fun with your group project groups. These are going to be really interesting. So Nicole will launch us into those rooms.
And just whenever you want to leave, you can close out. We won't stick around because I don't know how long each of you are going to be in your groups. So, and we also have some group members that are not here today. So just please remember to connect with them to fill them in on anything that you've decided in terms of next steps. Thanks, everybody.